The default import and export routing policies that are implemented by your Juniper device will really depend on two things. The first thing is which protocol are we talking about, and also which direction. There's a different default for import policies than with export policies. So let's take a quick look at some of the different protocols and what their default import and export policies are. The first protocol is the BGP protocol. So its default action with an import policy is to accept all BGP IP4 routes that have been configured for neighboring devices and to import those routes into the inet.0 routing table. It's also defaulted to accepting all BGP IP version 6 routes from neighboring devices and import those routes into the inet 6.0 routing table. The default export action is to re-advertise all learned BGP routes to all BGP speakers and follow protocol-specific rules such as prohibit iBGP speaker from re-advertising routes learned from another speaker. The DVMRP protocol has a default action of accept all DVMRP routes for importing and to import those into the inet.1 routing table, while the default action for exporting of DVMRP is to accept and export active DVMRP routes. ISIS has default policies, such as the import policy is to accept all ISIS routes and import them into the inet.0 and the inet 6.0 routing tables. The default export policy is to reject all ISIS routes. MPLS has a default import policy of accept all MPLS routes and import them into the inet.3 routing table, while the export policy has a default of accept and export any active MPLS routes. OSPF has a default action of accept all OSPF routes and import those into the inet.0 routing table for import as a default import policy, while the default export policy is to reject everything with OSPF. PIM dense mode has a default import policy of accept all PIM dense mode routes and import those into the inet.1 routing table, while the default for the export policy is to accept active PIM dense mode routes. PIM sparse mode has a default import policy of accept all PIM sparse mode routes and import those again into the inet.1 routing table, and the default export policy is to accept and export any active PIM sparse mode routes. Pseudo protocol has a default import policy of accept all direct and explicit routes and import those into the inet.0 routing table, while the default export route is those routes cannot be exported. RIP has a default import policy of accept all RIP routes from neighboring devices and then import those into the inet.0 routing table, while the default export policy is to reject everything. So no RIP messages are going to be exported from your router by default. RIP-NG, which is the RIP routing protocol for IP version 6, has a default import policy of accept all RIP-NG routes from neighboring devices and then import those routes into the inet 6 routing table. And the default export policy, again, is to reject everything with RIP-NG. And finally, there is a test policy that you can configure, and the test policy has a default import and export policy of accept all routes. So in this demonstration, we discussed the defaults for different import and export policies.